My two kids, Sam and Robbie, are twins. They're 6 years old. A year ago, we were living at our old house, but something happened that led to us moving. It's a long, awful story. I lived in my old house for 4 years. My wife Carol and I got married while I was living there, and we had our kids there too. The neighborhood was slowly changing, and not for the better, but even still, we originally planned on staying in that house for the foreseeable future, until this happened. We were a corner house, and the house behind us on the intersecting road was covered by a bunch of tall trees and bushes, so we hardly ever saw those neighbors. Our neighbor on the right, however, his name was Steve. He had just moved there less than a year ago at the time. I had only ever spoken with him a couple of times. Both times I could hardly understand what he said because of his heavy accent, and he just overall didn't seem like the friendliest guy. 2 of his windows overlooked our backyard. There wasn't much privacy. But whatever rooms the 2 windows were that overlooked the backyard, I had never seen the lights on in either of them, so I always assumed it was an unused guest room or something of that nature. One day in the summertime, Sam and Robbie were playing in the backyard in their blow-up pool and with their water guns while I was outside doing yard work. There came a certain point where I was walking towards the detached garage, and then I saw Steve next door at his window for a second. Only half a second after noticing him did he turn and walk away from the window. It was slightly odd for sure, but I left it alone. Later that day, as the sun was going down, the kids went back outside to play again. It was a very hot day, so they went back in their blow-up pool while Carol and I were in the kitchen as she was making dinner. Then the kids' laughter went quiet for a while, and suddenly Robbie came inside and said there was a flashing light from the neighbor's window. I had to follow him to the backyard to ask him to show me what he was talking about. He pointed to one of Steve's upstairs windows that overlooked the backyard, and he said there was a white light that kept coming from that window. I right away assumed the worst, and asked the twins if it looked like a camera flash. They both said yes. I told them it's time to dry off and come inside. So I helped them dry themselves, and then brought them in, where I went to tell Carol about this. She right away assumed the worst just like me. She said I should go next door and knock on Steve's door. So I did. But when I did, he never answered the door. His car was even in the driveway, so he had to be home. After a few attempts at knocking and ringing the bell, I gave up and went back to my house. I told Carol he wasn't opening up, which made what the kids said seem even more credible. While we couldn't prove that the white light the kids were seeing was a camera flash, it sure did sound like it, and it was concerning to hear. Some time passed, maybe even weeks, before one night when Carol and I were in the bedroom, we heard our side gate being quietly opened and closed outside. Carol wanted me to go check outside, so I stepped out into the backyard and looked around. I had on all the lights as I searched. I found nothing and nobody, but I noticed the lights in Steve's backyard were on. I went over to look over the fence into his yard, and I nearly jumped out of my skin when he came up to the fence from the other side and asked if I needed something. I asked him if he'd seen or heard anyone sneaking through our yard. He said no. I took this time to also ask him bluntly if he had by chance been watching my kids, as they thought someone was at his window taking pictures of them playing in the pool. His reaction to this was a bit suspicious. He acted overly offended to my asking this, almost yelling at me for such an accusation. Again, without proof, I couldn't, nor did I want to, start issues with a neighbor. I apologized and went back inside. Carol was not happy about this, saying he's full of shit. The next incident didn't happen until another few weeks later. This time it was in the middle of the night when we were asleep. I woke up to Carol shaking me in a panic. I looked around the room confused at first, but then when I heard the kids screaming from their room, I exploded from the bed and ran downstairs to the kids' room. Robbie was awake and crying, and I found out a few seconds later that his crying and screaming had awoken Sammy, who was crying and screaming in reaction to him. Robbie said there was someone outside the window a second ago, and there was a camera flash from the window. I got goosebumps, but I also felt my blood begin to boil. All I could say was, what did he look like? He said he didn't see. I brought the kids up to our room to sleep in the bed with us. With the lights off, I peeked out our bedroom window to look across at Steve's unlit house next door. I looked at each window of his house, and I found him. He, just like me, was peeking out one of the upstairs windows, in that same room that overlooks the backyard. I stormed outside next door and rang his doorbell like 15 times. He never opened his door. I did call the police just to make a report on Steve. That way, if any future reports were made about him from other people, maybe the police department would look into him. I never saw him again. Sometimes I'd sit out front waiting to see him outside, but he'd clearly avoid coming outside when I'd be out there. Because of this, we ended up moving within a month to a new house in a different but nearby town, which has proven to be a better place to raise the kids anyway.